Every Tuesday. She set one book aside before I even walked in. I never asked. She never explained. It became our silent ritual. Then one evening, a note fell out between the pages. "I've loved you since the day we met," it read. But I hadn't met her until 3 months ago, had I? My hands trembled. My fiancé was waiting outside in the car. I had 30 seconds to decide who I really was. What happened next changed both our lives forever. My name is Maddie Ellison, 29 years old, a middle school English teacher who'd spent her whole life following other people's expectations for happiness. I grew up in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina, where church pews and family opinions mattered more than anything I ever wanted for myself. I found Cruise and Company, books by accident, ducking inside during a sudden June rainstorm, my umbrella broken and useless in my hands. The owner looked up from behind the counter, dark eyes calm. Sawdust and coffee smell wrapped around her like something familiar. "You're soaked," she said simply, handing me a towel before I could even introduce myself or explain why I'd wandered in. Her name was Elena Cruz, and she'd owned the shop for 6 years, ever since she'd left Chicago behind entirely. I bought a battered copy of a novel I'd loved in college, and she wrote something small inside the cover before I left. The next week I came back, unsure why, and found another book waiting on the counter with my name on a sticky note. "How did you know I'd want this one?" asked, and she just shrugged like it was obvious, like she'd always known me. I told myself it was coincidence, that any good bookseller could guess a customer's taste after only 2 visits. But the 3rd week, and the 4th, she was always right. Always one step ahead of whatever I didn't know I wanted. My fiancé, Daniel, thought my new hobby was sweet, harmless, the kind of quiet thing that kept me busy while he worked late. I started rearranging my schedule around Tuesday afternoons, telling myself it was only about the books, only ever about the stories. Elena remembered details I mentioned once in passing: my mother's illness, my nervous laugh, the poem I'd read at my grandmother's funeral. I didn't have a word yet for what I felt sitting across from her, only that leaving the shop always felt like losing something. By August, I no longer pretended the bookshop was only about reading. I looked forward to Elena's voice more than anything else in my week. She told me about growing up in a strict Cuban-American household in Miami, where her parents still didn't fully accept who she was. I told her about Daniel, how we dated since high school, how everyone assumed we'd marry because that was simply the plan. "Do you love him?" she asked one evening, closing the shop early. And I gave the answer I'd rehearsed 100 times. "Of course I do," I said, but something in my voice cracked, and Elena looked at me like she'd heard the lie underneath it. We started meeting outside the shop too, coffee on Sunday mornings, long walks through the arboretum when neither of us wanted to go home. She showed me photographs from her old life in Chicago, a woman named Priya standing beside her in half of them, smiling. Gone now. What happened to her? I asked carefully, and Elena's jaw tightened before she finally answered, quiet and controlled. Her family found out about us. They gave her an ultimatum. She chose them, Elena said, and I understood then why she guarded herself. I started noticing things about myself I'd never let surface, how my chest tightened when Elena laughed, how I memorized her schedule without meaning to. Daniel proposed a wedding date in October, eager to finally set things in motion after 4 years of quiet, comfortable waiting. I said yes because saying no felt impossible, because I didn't have language yet for the doubt spreading through me like ink in water. I told Elena about the engagement date over tea, watching her face carefully, needing to know if it mattered to her at all. She smiled, too brightly, and congratulated me, then excused herself to the back room for almost 10 minutes straight. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying every moment she'd looked away too quickly, every silence that had lasted a beat too long. I started writing in a journal I hid from Daniel, filling pages with feelings I didn't yet have the courage to name aloud. One rainy October afternoon, Elena reached over the counter and brushed a leaf from my hair. Her fingers lingering a second too long. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The bell over the door rang, and the moment shattered like it had never happened. I left without buying anything that day, walking 3 miles home in the rain just to keep my mind from finishing that thought. For 2 weeks I avoided the shop entirely, terrified of what I might say if I let myself sit across from her again. Elena texted once, "Your book is still here whenever you want it." I read the message 11 times before I answered. When I finally returned, she didn't mention my absence, just handed me the reserved book like nothing had happened between us at all. But her hands were shaking slightly, and I realized the silence had cost her as much as it had cost me. "I need to tell you something," I finally said, my voice smaller than I intended, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You don't have to," Elena said quickly, panic flickering across her face, as if she already knew and was terrified of hearing it. "I think about you more than I think about my own wedding," I admitted, and the shop went completely, dangerously silent. Elena stepped back instead of forward, putting the counter firmly between us like a wall she needed for both our sakes. "You're engaged, Maddie. I can't be the reason you burn your whole life down," she said, though her eyes told a different story. I left angry, hurt, confused, not at her, but at the years of expectations that had built the cage I didn't know I was living in. My mother called that week, thrilled about wedding venues, and I found myself unable to answer a single question with real enthusiasm. I started researching, quietly, late at night, other women who'd left engagements, other families who'd eventually come around, other lives that survived the truth. I realized I'd never once, in 29 years, asked myself what I actually wanted instead of what I was supposed to want. I went back to the bookshop on a Thursday, not for a book, but to finally say the thing I'd been swallowing for months. Elena was reshelving in the poetry section, and I stood in the doorway until she noticed me standing there. "I'm not asking you to be the reason," I said. "I'm telling you I already know something is wrong with my life without you in it." She set down the book she was holding, slow and deliberate, like she needed a moment to believe I meant it. "I've saved you a book every week for 8 months, she said finally. "Did you ever wonder why I never once got it wrong?" I shook my head, waiting, sensing we were finally standing at the edge of something neither of us could take back. "Because I've known you longer than 8 months, Maddie," she said, and my whole understanding of us quietly began to shift. "What do you mean?" asked, my pulse loud in my ears, sensing the ground was about to move beneath everything I thought I knew. She told me about a train station in Chicago, 6 years earlier, where a stranger had helped her carry a fallen suitcase and vanished into a crowd. "That was you," she said. "I recognized you the moment you walked in from the rain. I never forgot your face." I didn't remember the station, not clearly, but I remembered a version of that day, rushing, embarrassed, thanking someone whose name I never learned. "I told myself if I ever saw you again, I wouldn't let you disappear a second time," Elena admitted, her voice finally breaking. The weight of that confession sat between us, fragile and enormous. 6 years of quiet hope folded into one small bookshop. I reached for her hand across the stack of poetry books, and this time neither of us pulled away from the moment. "I have to end things with Daniel first," I said. "Properly. Honestly. Not because of you, but because of me." Elena nodded, understanding immediately, though I could see how badly she wanted to ask me to stay right there instead. I walked home that night feeling lighter than I had in years, and terrified of everything I now had to face. I didn't know yet how much harder the truth would be to survive than the silence had ever been. I broke off my engagement to Daniel on a Sunday evening, sitting across from him at the kitchen table where we'd once planned our future. "Is there someone else?" he asked immediately, and I realized he'd probably suspected something for weeks without saying a word. I told him the truth because he deserved it. watching his face shift from disbelief to anger to something quieter and sadder. "Everyone's going to know," he said coldly. "Your mother. This whole town. Are you ready for what that actually means?" I wasn't ready. Not fully. But I told him I'd rather face it honestly than keep lying to both of us forever. Daniel left that night without another word. And by Wednesday, half the town somehow already knew the wedding was off. My mother called crying. Not from sadness but from something closer to panic. Asking what people at church would think of our family now. "It's not about them, Mom," I said, though my voice shook, betraying how much their opinion still mattered to me too. "Is it that woman from the bookshop?" she asked sharply. And I realized someone had already told her before I could. I later learned it was Rachel, my closest friend since childhood, who'd seen Elena and me holding hands outside a diner downtown. Rachel hadn't meant it maliciously, she claimed. Only mentioned it in passing to my mother without thinking of the consequences. But the damage was done. And my father stopped answering my calls entirely. 3 days of silence that felt louder than any argument. The school. A parent complained after hearing rumors, questioning whether I was an appropriate teacher for their 8th grade daughter. My principal called me into her office, not to fire me, but to warn me that some parents were asking questions about my personal life. I sat in my car afterward and cried for the first time since everything had started unraveling around me so quickly. Elena wanted to see me that week, but I kept my distance, afraid of what my presence near her might cost us both. "I told you this would happen," she said quietly when I finally called her. Old fear resurfacing in every careful word she chose. "This isn't Priya," I said. "I'm not leaving. I just need time to breathe before I lose everyone else in my life too." But Elena had heard that sentence before. From someone else. And I could feel her pulling back into herself, brick by brick. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding an old family photo album, trying to remind me of who I was supposed to be. "This isn't who you are," she insisted. And I finally said the words I'd swallowed for 29 years. "This is exactly who I am." She left without hugging me goodbye, and I stood in my doorway long after her car disappeared down the street. Rachel apologized, but our friendship never fully recovered from the careless words that had cost me so much in one conversation. I started attending a support group for LGBTQ adults in the area, meeting people who understood the particular grief of losing family slowly. Elena stopped calling as often, throwing herself into shop renovations instead, building distance the way she always had when things got difficult. I showed up at the bookshop one evening and found the closed sign up 2 hours early. Lights off. Door locked. I sat on the curb outside for almost an hour, wondering if I'd lost her too in the middle of losing everything else. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were red, and she admitted she'd been afraid to let me see her afraid. "I can't watch you lose your whole life and then watch you leave anyway," she said, echoing wounds from years before that never fully healed. "I'm not her," I said again, softer this time. "And you're not the reason I'm struggling. My family's fear is not yours to carry." Daniel, still bitter, told a few mutual friends a version of events that painted me as deceptive, cold, calculating from the very start. Whispers followed me through the grocery store, the gas station, even the pews of the church I'd attended my entire life. I stopped going to church for a while, unable to sit through sermons that suddenly felt aimed directly at the person I'd become. My father finally called, gruff and brief, saying only that he needed more time before he could talk to me properly. I told him I understood, though every unanswered question between us felt like another brick added to a wall neither of us built alone. Elena's own mother called her that same week, having heard secondhand through relatives, disappointment audible even through a bad phone connection. She said she still loves me, Elena told me, but she also said she prays this is a phase I'll grow out of. We sat together that night not talking, just existing in the same space, letting exhaustion replace words neither of us had left. I started to wonder if love was supposed to cost this much. If every person I'd known my whole life had to disappear for it. Elena reminded me gently that some people stay. That Rachel had apologized. That my father had at least picked up the phone. Not everyone leaves, she said. Some people just need longer to catch up to who you've already become. I clung to that sentence through the hardest weeks, repeating it to myself on nights when doubt crept back in uninvited. A former colleague of Daniel's, a man named Grant, began a rumor that I'd been unfaithful during the entire relationship with Elena. The rumor spread faster than the truth ever could, and I felt the town's opinion of me solidify into something I couldn't reverse. I confronted Daniel directly, asking if he'd started it, and his silence told me everything his denial tried to hide. I was hurt, he finally admitted. I wanted people to be angrier at you than they were angry with themselves for judging us. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was honesty. And for the first time since the breakup, I felt something soften between us. Elena and I grew closer through the chaos, choosing each other again every single difficult morning despite everything working against us. But just as things began to steady, a new complication arrived, one that would test everything we built far more than gossip ever had. Elena received a letter from Chicago, and her hands trembled reading it. The past she thought she'd buried standing at her door again. The letter was from Priya, Elena's ex, now divorced, writing to apologize for the ultimatum she'd given years earlier that ended everything between them. She wants to meet, Elena told me, folding the letter carefully, unreadable in a way that made my stomach twist with dread. I told her she should go. That closure mattered, even as jealousy quietly gnawed at every reassurance I tried to offer her. Elena drove to Chicago that weekend, and I spent 3 days convincing myself I trusted her completely while barely sleeping at all. She came back quieter than she'd left, and for 2 days she wouldn't tell me exactly what had been said between them. Priya asked if I still loved her, Elena finally admitted, watching my face carefully for whatever reaction might follow that confession. My chest went cold. What did you say? Asked, bracing myself for an answer I suddenly wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I said the version of me who loved her doesn't exist anymore, Elena said. That version left the moment I met you at the train station. Relief flooded through me. But underneath it sat a new fear, that I'd let insecurity almost cost me the honesty we'd built together. I apologized for doubting her, and Elena admitted she should have told me about the letter the moment it arrived, not days later. We promised each other, sitting on her apartment floor at midnight, that secrets, even small, well-meaning ones, would no longer have a place between us. Meanwhile, my father finally agreed to meet me for coffee, the first real conversation we'd had in almost 2 months of silence. He didn't apologize outright, but he asked questions, real ones, about Elena, about happiness, about whether I finally felt like myself again. I do, I told him honestly. For the first time in years, I actually recognized the person looking back at me in the mirror. He nodded slowly, uncomfortable but trying, and told me he'd need time but wouldn't shut the door on me completely. It wasn't the full acceptance I'd hoped for, but it was more than I'd expected, and I held on to it carefully. Then Daniel resurfaced, this time not out of malice, but with unexpected information that shifted everything I thought I understood about our past. I need to tell you something, he said, meeting me outside the school, nervous in a way I hadn't seen from him before. Grant didn't just spread rumors on his own. Your mother asked him to, Daniel admitted, guilt written plainly across his face. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, betrayal landing somewhere I hadn't braced for, somewhere far closer to home than gossip from strangers. I confronted my mother that same evening, and after long minutes of denial, she finally broke down and admitted the truth. I thought if people believed you'd been cheated on, they'd blame Elena instead of thinking less of our whole family, she confessed, ashamed. Her logic was cruel and calculated, but underneath it I recognized something familiar, her own terror of losing her place in this town. You hurt me to protect yourself, I said. And for once, my mother had no defense left to offer in response. I left her house that night more devastated than angry, grieving the mother I'd wanted rather than the one standing in front of me. Elena held me while I cried, not saying much, just present in the exact way I'd learned to need from her. Families don't have to be perfect to eventually come around, she reminded me. Mine hasn't. Not fully. But the door isn't closed either. A week later, my school board scheduled a hearing after 3 parents formally complained, threatening my job over rumors that had never been true. I stood in front of the board and told the truth plainly. I was gay. I hadn't cheated on anyone. And I was still a good teacher. Several colleagues spoke on my behalf, describing my work with struggling students, refusing to let rumors define my entire career. The board ultimately dismissed the complaints, citing no violation of policy, but the experience left me shaken for weeks afterward. Elena proposed we open a small reading corner at the shop specifically for LGBTQ teens who needed a safe place after school. The idea gave me something to build instead of something to survive. And slowly, purpose began replacing exhaustion in my daily life. My father showed up to help paint the new reading corner without being asked. Sawdust on his shirt, saying very little the entire afternoon. It was the closest thing to acceptance he could offer yet. And I understood that some love arrives quietly, one small gesture at a time. Rachel returned too, bringing donated books for teens, her way of trying to rebuild what her careless words had almost destroyed. Slowly, the community around the shop began to shift. Not everyone, but enough people that the isolation started to feel less permanent. Then, 3 weeks before winter, Elena received devastating news. Her shop's building had been sold, and the new owner wanted her out by spring. 6 years of my life, she said, staring at the eviction notice. And I'm losing it just as things were finally getting better. I promised we'd figure it out together, though I had no idea yet how we'd save the one place that had brought us together. We searched for new locations, applied for small business loans, and stayed up late running numbers that never quite added up to hope. My mother, unexpectedly, showed up one evening with a check. An attempt at apology neither of us knew how to speak aloud yet. I can't undo what I did, she said. But I can help you keep something that clearly matters more to you than my approval ever should. I didn't fully forgive her that night, but I accepted the help, understanding that repair sometimes starts before forgiveness fully arrives. With combined savings, a small loan, and my mother's contribution, we found a new storefront 2 blocks from the original shop. The move meant weeks of exhausting labor, but also something unexpected. My father working beside Elena for hours, slowly, quietly becoming something like friends. One evening, hauling shelves together, I overheard him tell her, "Take care of my daughter," and Elena promised him she would. I stood in the doorway, unseen, watching 2 people I loved build something neither of them had expected to need from each other. Opening weekend for the new shop was scheduled for the 2nd Saturday of December. Exactly 1 year since the day we'd first met in the rain. None of us knew yet that opening day would bring the biggest twist of all, one that would test everything we'd rebuilt. Opening day arrived under a heavy December sky, snow threatening to keep everyone home just when we needed the whole town to show up. I woke to a text from Daniel. Of all people, check the local paper. I wanted to make things right. I had no idea what he meant. The article revealed that Daniel had quietly convinced his father, the building's original buyer, to lower our new lease instead of raising it. I couldn't fix what I said, Daniel later told me, but I could fix what I could actually control. I thanked him, meaning it fully. By 10 that morning, despite the snow, a line had formed outside the new storefront, breath visible in the cold winter air. My father arrived early, insisting on shoveling the sidewalk himself, refusing to let anyone slip on opening day of his daughter's new beginning. My mother came too, holding a tray of pastries, standing awkwardly near the door until Elena's mother, visiting from Miami, greeted her warmly. I hadn't known Elena's mother was coming, and watching the two women who'd once feared us now speaking quietly together undid something tight in my chest. Rachel arrived with a group of former students, having organized a fundraiser I hadn't known about, banners reading "Welcome Home" strung across the windows. Priya sent flowers with a card that read simply, "I'm glad you found your person. Truly." Elena read it twice before smiling for the first time all morning. The reading corner filled quickly with teenagers browsing quietly, some of them shy, some of them already asking Elena where the safe shelf was. I watched Elena move through the crowd, radiant and exhausted, everything she built from nothing finally standing solid around her at last. Around noon, my father tapped a glass for quiet, clearing his throat in front of a room full of people he barely knew. "I've spent a year learning how to be the father my daughter actually needed," he said, voice rough. "And I'm still learning. But I'm here." The room applauded, and I cried harder than I expected to, watching him nod toward Elena like an unspoken apology finally being paid in full. That evening, after the crowd thinned, Elena led me to the back room where the very first book she'd ever saved for me still sat. "I never told you the whole truth about that day," she said, pulling out the original note I'd found tucked between the pages months earlier. Beneath the note was a second, older piece of paper dated 6 years earlier, from the day of the train station in Chicago. "I wrote your name down that day, hoping I'd remember it," she said. "I never got the chance to ask. I've kept it ever since." My hand shook holding paper older than our entire relationship, proof that some things had been waiting patiently long before either of us understood them. "You saved a book for a stranger's name for 6 years, I whispered, and Elena finally let herself cry, quiet and unguarded, in front of me. "I wasn't saving a book," she said. "I think I was saving space, just in case life ever gave me a second chance to find you." I knelt slightly, not fully planned, pulling a small ring from my coat pocket that I'd bought weeks earlier and carried every single day since. "I'm not asking because of a train station or a note," I said. "I'm asking because every version of my life is better with you in it." Elena laughed through tears, both hands over her mouth, nodding before I even finished the question hanging fragile in the quiet back room. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Obviously yes. You impossible, wonderful woman." The bell over the shop door rang as if the whole town somehow already knew. My mother appeared in the doorway, having come back for her forgotten coat, and stopped completely still at what she'd just walked in on. For a long moment nobody spoke, until my mother crossed the room and hugged us both, tighter than she'd hugged me in over a year. "I'm sorry it took me this long," she said quietly. "I'm not sorry anymore about who you love. I'm sorry I ever made you doubt it." Word spread through the shop within minutes, and soon half the opening day crowd had returned, cheering, crying, raising paper cups of cider in celebration. My father hugged Elena for the first time, gruff and brief, murmuring something only she could hear that made her laugh through fresh tears. Rachel hugged me so hard I nearly lost my footing, whispering that she'd never stop making up for the mistake that had cost us months. Priya's flowers sat on the counter beside us, a quiet reminder that even old pain could soften into something like peace, given enough time. I looked around the shop, my father sweeping snow off boots, my mother laughing with Elena's mother, Rachel refilling cider, and finally felt entirely, fully home. Elena squeezed my hand under the counter, the same counter where a stranger had once handed a soaked, broken umbrella woman a towel. 6 years and 1 rainstorm, she whispered. I'd wade through both again, 100 times over, just to end up exactly here with you. Snow kept falling outside the windows, soft and steady, covering the whole town in something that finally, quietly, felt like acceptance. We were married the following June in the reading corner of our shop, surrounded by family who'd finally learned to choose love over fear. 6 years after a train station in Chicago, Elena Cruz still saves me a book every single week now. She never has to guess. Then D.